This is letter 19. Charlotte, this is going to give us a summary, but Alice will give us an overall review, and this is the sun. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I won't go too much into what Tomberg's written because Alice is going to go through that in full, but just a few kind of pointers to get us in the mood. That resurrection is the divine analogy of the act of human memory, and this Arcanum will be guiding us towards the point where we can think about resurrection as the great work. We've also got the idea of the zodiac as the book The Soul 8, and following the star of intelligence to the manger and bringing with us the fruits of intuition, we're warned not to turn to Herod, who is also an eternal principle, but to turn to the star as this guiding principle. And as I'm sure Alice is going to go into, intuition is going to be the kind of key attainment of the teaching of the sun as Tomberg goes into it. So yeah, the seal of Solomon, I'm sure you'll get to that, Alice, so I won't spoil that.
Go ahead, spoil any part you want to, especially what you were first talking about, because I read that a while ago and I'm a little foggy. So anything you can clarify, I appreciate it.
Well, I just think we will get to it, but the seal of Solomon is this wonderful hermetic symbol, if we keep this in our minds, as being the marriage of fire and water, and the Holy Father, Holy Son, Holy Spirit, Holy Mother, Holy Daughter, Holy Soul. And this formula together brings us to the luminous Holy Trinity, the 3 times 3, the 9, the Pistis Sophia, and she's the crown. This is the luminous Trinity, the crowning luminary. So this is a great culmination, this Arcanum, of everything that's gone before. And if we look back to what some of Tomberg's own teachers and guides in his early days were speaking of, for example, Nina Rudnikova, she introduces the sun as the great work, the philosophic gold, and the synthetic philosophy in its entirety. She says that having gone through all the principles up to this point, and she particularly singles out up to the tower, we return to the first. We still have to know ourselves, but we have at least passed through these stages, and consciousness must now break through the roof, which is the resurrection principle, I'd suggest, or again descend into the lower layers under the power of illusory ideas created by humanity. To break through the roof is to detach from the earth, from a fish become a bird, and direct your flight into the unknown, having support only in yourself. So I think there's a little bit of a warning as well, that even though we have reached a crown in our arcana exercises, we still have to attain to the great work of resurrection, which is clearly no small feat. However, the sun is nevertheless a way out of the hopeless condition, which we got hints of, more than hints of, I think, with the moon, and also, of course, the tower in the earlier studies. So now I'll talk about Koth. So as we already know, the different arcana are associated with different Hebrew letters. In the case of the sun, it's associated with the letter Koth, which it's a little bit tricky in the sense that this actually has negative connotations in the traditional Jewish teaching, as representing negative thought, negative speech, negative actions, and death. However, it also invites us towards a transformation, which is the great work, the resurrection. So I think that's where we can align those principles. Eliphas Levi, who's a great grandfather of tarot studies, says the sun is the sanctuary of spiritual beings who've been loosened from the ties of earth life, and there is a blazing tabernacle in which resides the soul of the Messiah. Meeb speaks of the sun as truth. Shmakov he's always very complicated, but I'll read a little extract. I've not fully translated this, but you might be able to connect it with bits from Tomberg, especially when he talks about the triangle. So human development follows the well-known law of the pyramid. The higher the synthesis, the greater the number of elements it embraces, and conversely, the greater the number of known and approved elements, the higher the degree of synthetic consciousness is available to man. The law of the pyramid, like all the laws of nature, is valid only within certain limits. When the evolving human consciousness touches the spirit world for the first time, its entire being experiences the deepest upheaval. It becomes a link of the cosmic spirit. It is illuminated by the cosmic or divine consciousness. The introduction of man to this supreme gift is the crowning achievement of a long cosmic journey. All paths, all searches, all religions have as their ultimate goal this gift, which is truly the birth of man in eternal life. No matter how hard a person who has experienced this great happiness tries to describe it to other people, they will never be able to understand it. This is the greatest change in the whole being of man, the shaking of all sides of him, the breaking of all fetters, the complete victory over the world of time and change. The descent of cosmic consciousness is the birth of Christ in the inner man, the victory over death, and the communion with the universal truth, life, and eternity. So I think what Tomberg is trying to do when he teaches the Arcanum of the Sun is to bring us to the point where we're ready to have this experience by trying to impress upon us how important intuition is in achieving that goal. So it's not just about our reason and rationality and logic in understanding the Arcanum, it's also about that spontaneous spark and what faith brings to the equation, which is enabling us to connect it to the true wisdom of the divine. So with that, Alice.
Well, that was excellent. I don't really have much to add because I think that you really wrapped up the whole very, very well and got the most important points across. I can only add, just elaborate a little bit more, and I really haven't much to say. We don't have much time left, so I'd rather just have us talk. I want to just bring up a couple things that are rising to the top of my mind. One is towards the end when we talk about the work with the number 9, and Tomberg seems to imply that this 19 Arcanum is a higher octave of 9, and that we needed to go back to letter 9, which is the Hermit. So I did go back to that and review that. And so there's a deep connection between the Hermit, which is the Hermit is developing through raising his consciousness. He's developing a feeling, and Tomberg emphasizes this development of feeling because it's that feelingness that we work through the transcendent self to feeling a wider consciousness of the spiritual worlds. And this is an awakening of your spiritual senses, which the Hermit specifically is working on an individual introspective level. He is working on developing his spiritual senses. So this is why you have to go back to 9 and think about and contemplate that, do that work, because that's where the work really is. And then when you're ripe and ready, you're ready for the higher octave of work presented by the cosmic consciousness, which will then come down to meet you if you've done this work.
You're very right. And also the Hermit is where he talks about the mysterious gift of black perfection, which really is this intuition. That in a nutshell is what enables us to connect to this Sophia principle, this higher octave. So like you say, we that's where the seed is sown. And I think actually Nina Rudnikova mentions that as well, how we have to, or it might be Tomberg, I'm not sure, but how from that number 9 of the Hermit, we have 10 more quite difficult lessons to get through, including the devil, the moon, the tower, the really hard stuff, to get us to the point where we attempt the great work. But as that is the work of resurrection, it's not a small thing. This is a life work. It's the whole of the Hermetic philosophy, basically, is kind of summed up. But at least, I think to even have an inkling that it's there is in itself an attainment when it comes to this Arcanum, because clearly, the actual work of resurrection doesn't come in some ways until we die, when we pass through the door. So I think this is a preparation in every way for, even more to come later.
Exactly. That's and Steiner talks about that too, about there are spiritual exercises such as reviewing your day every day, going back and reviewing backwards your day, as a spiritual exercise to you get the life review as right after you die. And so he is saying you can cut that a little short and work closer to resurrection.
That's the memory aspect, isn't it? That Tomberg, the supernatural memory.
Exactly. So you work with your memory consciously, and then at the juncture of moving into the spiritual world, you will have already done some of that work, and that will hasten your passage. So what she's talking about, the black perfection, the perfect night, which is referred to in the Hermit, is echoed here. I'm glad you mentioned that, in the idea of the sun at midnight.
Yeah.
That is the sun at midnight. And exactly. I don't know how this is connected to the great central sun, but I don't think I need to go there right now. I think I'm just that would just kind of confuse.
Yes, because it's in the Zohar, so it's a really immense.
Exactly.
I think it's enough just to have the seed of that in our minds.
Seed of that idea, and the important seed that you brought up, which is the fire and water. So if you look at, I went back after reading this whole thing, back to the image itself of the sun, the sun with these drops around it. And to me, that evoked the idea of the fire and the water. That is a very mystical idea. It's a very mystical, alchemical idea. So if you think about the Seal of Solomon, I'm just going to try to make this graphic, which is the Seal of Solomon is Father, Son, Holy Spirit, which would be the fire. That would be the Pentecostal fire. That is, we're familiar with that image. And then if you take this image and superimpose that over it, would represent a vessel, water, the chalice, the blade and the chalice. So the blade being fire, think of a fiery sword, and the chalice with the water. And those are superimposed on each other, and that creates the luminous trinity of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Daughter, Holy Soul. And from my first reading of Tomberg, this was one of the concepts that really, really stuck with me, that this,
Amen.
It helped me to balance out, for one thing, it helped me to balance out the metaphysical principles on a more transcendent level, the metaphysical principles of gender, male and female, which I feel in current dogma, current metaphysics, is imbalanced towards the masculine. This is bringing back and restoring the feminine principle, which to me is glaringly missing, especially when I'm in church and we're reciting the Nicene Creed. I recite the Nicene Creed, and I find myself saying, when we talk about the Holy Spirit, that she brought forth the scripture. She brought forth through wisdom, and I forget the line, but whatever. I don't even want to remember it. But I refer to her as she. I would be accused of improper theology to refer to the Holy Spirit as she. But Pistis Sophia is so missing, and in my church, even Mary is missing. Mary is completely missing. So I really feel this is a great deficit that Tomberg is trying to bring up. I am jumping to the end, but this is my intuition about this. I want to get, that's important to me. The Pistis
those drops you mentioned, there's 12 of them. And I think it's worth pointing out that that's, I think, analogous to the 12 stars and the woman of Revelation, because I think when he talks about the hierarchy, he says there's 12 more levels. So I think we get to the ultimate that we can within our self-consciousness, the sun and the moon, but we still have 12 more layers, which is I think 9 hierarchies and then the Holy Trinity. And that's symbolized by the 12 stars of the woman of Revelations. And I think that's no accident that there's 12 drops on the card.
It's confusing to me, though, that there's the 9 levels of the spiritual hierarchies, and then the Trinity being the 3 on top of that, of making the 12. But yet we're talking about the Holy Trinity being another 9, and being the Seal of Solomon with at least the 6 points. So I get confused there. These are all they're again, they're octaves. So the octave of the 9 hierarchies, I would say then, is topped by the 9 of the luminous Trinity, right?
Yeah, and I think he's actually condensing a lot of information from the Zohar and from his earlier teachers. I mean, if you read into Meves, for example, the mathematical deconstructions are expanded much more, so you might not want to wade through it, but you do get a bit more background into how he gets to the 9. And I think bear in mind that he's linking it to the Hermit, which is the 9th Arcanum, helps. But I know what you mean. I think that he's not necessarily explaining all of his thought process with that, which is quite unusual for him, because normally he takes everything step by step, doesn't he? But I think there's probably so much in this one. Because there are other hints as well, because I think, with the Seal of Solomon, so that's obviously the principle of 6, the number 6. The 7th principle in this context then becomes the Messiah principle.
Yeah.
For as long as we're going into numerology, we're in a bit of a different zone. So I think he's probably mindful of not going too far into the numerology, but giving us a taste of it.
Exactly. There's so many things. I mean, he could have gone into the 12 stars as being the qualities of soul developed in the zodiac too. Yeah. But it is an octave above that. Again, the 12 stars. So this is where, Charlotte and I are riffing. I wish you jump in. Let me ask if there's anything that you all want to focus on. We've been dancing around. What came out to you that you are maybe were quizzical about?
I'll jump in. I love this chapter, just as I love them all, but maybe this one especially. The thing that was balm to my soul was give me the confidence with regard to the spontaneous wisdom of the heart, that I can start that way. I love the way he talked about the scholastics and how they had the faith, and then they all had to develop the logic to prove the faith. We have the logic, we have the science, but we've lost the faith. So I felt good about that. I felt like we're in a progression that I'm a part, that I fit in. This cooperation between intuition or spontaneous wisdom and intelligence, I thought that was wonderful. Listening to the two of you talk is awesome. I realized that I need a basic primer in Hermeticism. I do have the Kybalion, which I've read, and I think I got that, but much of this, I would love to learn more. So if some point Alice or Charlotte, want to send me a book or two, a title that would give me better grounding in that would be awesome. Obviously I loved everything he said about Mary. I understand a little bit about the Sophia Piscis. I'm still, my spirituality is still right there with the rosary. And I think it's as strong as anything else. I think that kind of sums up anything I can
I think the same about the rosary. I think if you're going to do one thing, then probably saying the rosary is it.
Yep. It's concentration, it's focus, it's heart, it's visual, it's everything.
And you're building the egregore, the good egregore of the whole of Christian worship throughout time, basically.
Now, see, I understand, I get what you're saying, but like the term egregore, which I looked up after, I know it's sort of a general spirit of Weltanschauung. I don't know. It could be bad or good.
It's usually used negatively. Yeah.
But it's usually used negatively.
Negatively.
But anyway, I'm just saying, I'm so ignorant. But I get you.
Not at all. Not at all, Pam. You're not at all.
No.
And let me add that if you've read the Kybalion, the Kybalion, whatever, however you pronounce it, that is an excellent primer of the Hermetic philosophy, of the metaphysics. It's do you know that book, Charlotte?
Yes, I do know it, and I've read it, and I agree. I mean, some people look down on the Kybalion, but I don't. I do also think it's a good introduction. I think for our purposes, it's possibly on the theosophical side, so therefore quite aligned with Nina Rodnikova, for example, Tomberg's teacher. But Tomberg himself is more Christian than you would get from the Kybalion. So I think it gives the basis.
I looked at the Kybalion as a direct tapping back into Hermes Trismegistus, the Corpus Hermeticum, the really just the strictly straight on dry transcendental metaphysics, which is something that I really latched onto that because it helped me understand Christianity, because I really feel that Christianity has lost its metaphysical grounding. It's at least what we're taught, you know, in the mainstream exoteric church. There's a loss. I look at it, I liken it unto a body whose skeleton has become this amorphous gelatinous thing. You can't talk to anybody with any depth or seriousness about Christian philosophy, Hermetic philosophy, I would argue it is, without having this metaphysical, skeleton. And so that's why I like the Kybalion, because it brings it back, the principles of polarity, of cause and effect, of masculine, feminine, gender, yada, yada, all those principles. Those are metaphysical principles that you must have a common language around. Otherwise, your talk is just going to be a bunch of blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
A bunch of mumbo jumbo and feel good stuff. So,
and it's easy to understand all of it, I think, the Kybalion. So I'm going to read that again. And
entry point book. It really is a great entry point, I think, to the Hermetic systems of thought.
Still, if you could send me something a little more with more of the specifics and some of the language that you use, I would love that, if it's possible.
Charlotte has these books that she has researched and written. And so she was referring to Meebs. That's a wonderful resource. If she would know where to send you on this, because it's beyond me. The Tarot by Meebs is wonderful. I have that. What else would you recommend, Charlotte?
Well, I mean, I was quoting from the Tomberg school, if you like. So these were people that taught him in earlier life. So Meebs, the Tarot Major's been a big one, Nina Rodnikova and Shmakov. I think when it comes to tarot, I mean, so these are just translations from the original Russian. It's not my original work. It's just translations. Yeah, I think unless we're going to go back to the actual texts, the ancient texts, the Hermetic texts. And
do you?
Well, I think I can send you some of the links to the old books, that the kind of 4th, 5th century Hellenistic texts as well. They just require some sort of interpretation, but yeah, for sure, I can send you links to those. And of course, the Pistis Sophia itself, I think, is kind of maybe the core text for all we're studying.
Yes, and that's something that I'm not terribly familiar with, the text of the Pistis Sophia, but that is a great touchstone.
Yeah,
I need to go there. That's where I need to go. But there's also the Emerald Tablet, Thoth. There's the Corpus Hermeticum. there's the Kore Cosmu. There's all these texts if you want to look. And I would just use your intuitive sense as to what you need to fill in the gaps for you.
Okay.
Because no matter what path you come to, if it all prepares you to receive Tomberg more deeply, I really do. I do uphold Tomberg as the ultimate authority on the Christian relationship to the Hermetic tradition, the Christian path. That's what it's called, a journey into Christian Hermeticism. And he does not waver from that ever, which is very difficult, that he maintains that headlight that's just straight ahead on the path. He maintains that in spite of bringing everything else in the entire world.
It's unique, isn't it?
It's amazing.
But that's exactly what can make it confusing somewhat in relation to the other texts, which are not necessarily as Christian, or they're Gnostic rather than Catholic. So there's a different emphasis in them. But I agree, it's all part of it. He has synthesized all that in his work, and I suppose to really understand where he's at, that's what we need to do as well.
So, for instance, you can bring things in if they're within your experience, such as, I've practiced yoga for years, and I know about the Advaita, the non-dual path, which is what Tomberg brings up here through the Vedantist tradition. And anybody who's done transcendental meditation, so Pam, you're familiar with this.
Very, yeah.
Yes. So a lot of us are, because a lot of us sought through the Eastern paths of the Eastern mystical philosophies, of the Hindu philosophies, etc. We've gone that way. So we've explored that. We have our toe in that world. But yet, to me, I could never become a Hindu yogi because I'm a Christian yogi, in the sense that the distinction he brings up here is very important, where he talks about the limits of the transcendental self, which in the Vedantic tradition is called Brahman. I am Brahman. And this identification of I am with God. I am God is what it's saying. I am Brahman.
That's the error.
That Tomberg just says, oh, no, that's a conflation of the transcendental self with God. Cannot do that. So the non-dual path that of the Eastern philosophies has that, as far as he's concerned, a great impediment to growth, because it's putting a ceiling on. If you think that you've reached the ultimate by reaching your transcendental self, such as when you're in transcendental meditation, if you think that you've reached it, that you reached nirvana, or you've reached samadhi, or something of that nature, he will say, wrong. You have not begun to touch the worlds of the spiritual worlds of the transcendental selves, he calls them, above you. And
it's the New Age deception, isn't it? So many new seekers, they get this and they do this wonderful practice, and they're so right, but then, like you say, get to the ceiling point and it's go, oh, you now think you're God.
Don't not gonna happen.
But people get stuck there because, and like when you become really adept at transcendental meditation and accomplished in that path, you will develop siddhis, you will feel powerful. And so it is quite an easy mistake to make, but that's inflation, isn't it? That's the ego inflation that we all can fall prey to.
It's a great danger, because Tomberg points out on the non-dualistic path, if you follow that track, you will bump into the devil. The devil is there because the devil is also an immortal transcendental being.
Yes.
Right? So
a threshold guardian, in fact.
Yeah, unless you get guidance beyond that level, unless you are open to, you will have that spiritual inflation where remember in the chariot, there's the canopy over the head of the aspirant. And that is that sphere where you're just reaching the edge of human development and thought and the top of the Tower of Babylon, all that. But there's that ceiling. And unless you break through that, or you're broken through grace, you're not going to get any further.
And I think it's a great problem in the age we're living in, because so many people, I think since Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists, this great knowledge was open to us. And like you say, we needed it, and it helped humanity to ascend to a certain point. But now so many people, that's led them to reject Christianity and think, okay, I found the path now, this is working, this is great, you know, I love it. But then they're throwing out literally the baby with the bathwater. And it's quite, and I find a lot of people who don't have a Christian grounding simply cannot grasp what we're talking about here. It really is a ring past knot, and it's very difficult to explain it because they've already rejected the Christian system. And so in their mind, that's wrong. And like you say, they then come up against the devil, whereas what they should be doing is going through the door.
It's the ring past knot, exactly. I also wanted to point out an insight that I didn't see in Tomberg here, but that I came up with. If you look at the Seal of Solomon, and you look at a drawing of the Seal of Solomon. Let me get one up here because I did a drawing of this. If you take the Seal of Solomon, which also is the Merkaba, by the way, it's a Merkaba vehicle. This goes back to early Jewish transcendental mysticism. But if you take a line, do you see how I put a dotted line all the way through the middle on the horizontal axis?
Yes. That
creates a mirror image, as above, so below. Does it not?
Yes.
There you go. It's as above, so below. And so there's that. Now, Tomberg did not explicitly talk about this, but he did.
Mebes does, though.
He does, and he does quote from the Emerald Table of Hermes here. May that which is below be as that which is above, and may that which is above be as that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of one thing.
Yeah.
And that is a great quote. And I noticed that, you know, he brings that up at the very beginning, never ties it in when he actually brings up the Seal of Solomon. That's for you to make that link.
That's a great magical symbol. I don't know if you can see what's written on the,
yeah.
on the top of the,
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
The long face, the macrocosm is the divinity, and then the reflection, that's the microcosm. That's kind of us attempting to reflect that. Yeah, it's a really important image.
And so then where he ties that in, I think he ties that in with the Revelation quote, which is a touchstone revelation, which is a great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. There you go. There's a symbolic image right there to unpack about as above, so below. It is that same, is it right, Charlotte? I mean, that is that same reflection of cosmic, the spiritual realities reflecting the realities of natura naturans, the natural world below.
Thank you. Yes, I'll look with it. And
wonderful. Yeah, so rich to start connecting the dots here.
Yeah, no, that sounds wonderful. And
I'll read a little bit about what Mebes says, if you like. He says he's actually looking at the seal. It's in the book throughout it, but he says the pantacle of Arcanum 6 and the lovers is formed by two interlaced triangles, one being the image reflected from the other. The names given to this pantacle are Star of Solomon or Seal of Solomon, right face of the great pantacle of Solomon, a mystic hexagram, a sign of the macrocosm. And at the center of the figure is the stauros, symbolizing the process of fertilization. The vertical line, activity, fecundates the horizontal line, passivity. This means that the rising triangle should be regarded as the original and the descendant as the reflection of the first. This pantacle, despite its simplicity, perhaps because of its simplicity, contains almost the whole significance of Arcanum 6 and allows so many different interpretations that the knowledge of only part of them already proves a solid degree of initiation. So that's how important that symbol is.
What page is that on, Mebes?
I'm on page 109. I don't know if it's exactly the same because this is an old version.
An old version, sure.
Because he's got another image of it there.
But he's dealing with Arcanum 6.
Yeah, and
okay.
Arcanum 6 is really important because it goes into the whole of the divine androgyne. When you look into the minor arcana, this becomes incredibly significant. Those principles of the Kalian, which Pamela was mentioning, they are really brought out when you look at the minor arcana, because it's all about the divine androgyny, which is a incredibly
Okay.
that's a really mystical teaching. And he goes on to say the ascending triangle can be considered as the triangle of Jesus, symbolizing the evolutionary process of our redemption. Consequently, the descending triangle will be considered as a triangle of Mary, the elements participated in the involutionary process of the incarnation. The Stauros points to redemption as a target and the incarnation as a means. And then he talks about the fiery water. So analysing the pantacle as a sign of the macrocosm, that is, as the general scheme of the unrolling of phenomena in nature, we will call the ascending triangle the triangle of fire, symbolic of evolutionary processes, renovators and purifiers. And this taps into the idea of fire as having to purify the channels and the pathways on the tree of life, ready for the water to be received. And I don't know if you remember when we looked at the tree of life, but the middle pillar, the mother letters are placed upon the middle pillar with shin at the bottom.
Yes.
As the purifying force, then mem, the water in the heart, and then this creates the divine breath, the aleph, at the top.
The divine breath being ruach,
The ruach, yeah.
Right.
the holy breath.
Yeah, the descending triangle, that's the involution process of multiplying and complicating the manifestations, that's the multiplicity of cells, I suppose you could say, the many transcendental eyes, and that can be a stagnant routine. I won't read
Your microphone is really difficult.
Oh,
to
sorry.
hear.
Okay, I'll stop now.
Yeah, no, it's maybe when you sit back, maybe that's
Could be.
like what happens is I think when you lead forward, the compressor kicks in and just squelches everything you're saying.
Okay.
It sounds better when you're back.
Mhm.
But no, but because we hate missing that. We hate missing what you just said.
All right.
But I want to go back to the Tetragrammaton again, which he's mapping onto, Tomberg's mapping onto the eternal name of Yod-He, Vav-He. And he maps this onto the masculine and feminine principle of the luminous Trinity. So this is important. So Yod is father, He is mother, Vow is son, and He is daughter also. So there you go. There's the interweaving of the masculine and feminine. And in the created world, he describes this as manifested through Shekinah, which is a feminine principle of the community of Israel, the glory of God and the community of Israel. So that's a very important thing. I can't unpack Shekinah right now, but let Shekinah just float through your being, because Shekinah would definitely be related to the Pistis Sophia, the feminine principle. And he waxes very poetic when he goes into the names of the divine feminine. He loves to do this. She is known as Pistis Sophia, wisdom, the Shekinah, the mother, virgin of light, pure celestial Mary, Our Lady of the Seven Sorrows. And that would be on top of the seven pillars of creation. They're all connected. But going back to what he says is created in the manifested world, Shekinah, the glory, the community of Israel, the Messiah King, which represents salvation, redemption, resurrection, okay? And Ruach HaKodesh, the holy breath, the breath that was over the waters. So if you think about, the original images in Genesis, you get it. When the breath moved over the waters of the deep, mysterious, and so these are very archetypal mysteries, and one can only just contemplate them to parse what they really are about. So I would just ask you to just let those things play in your mind: Shekinah, Messiah King, and Ruach, and just see where you go with that, and mapping that onto the luminous Trinity: Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Daughter, Holy Soul. It brings it from a flat two-dimensional theological concept of the Trinity into a three-dimensional living, breathing, luminous Trinity is so much richer, so much more complete. And to me, this is what the Star of Bethlehem depicts, really. This is the Star of Bethlehem. If you during Epiphany, we have I've seen a floating tetragrammaton, which is I've stared at in fascination, because that Platonic image it's one of the ideal forms of geometry, and you can contemplate that, and just the symbolism of these shapes, these symbols, the seal of Solomon, the tetragrammaton, you can get a lot from just contemplating or meditating on those sacred shapes. It's very important that Tomberg's bringing these in.
Mm-hmm.
They're filled.
They're like keys, aren't they? They're keys to the door. That's exactly what we're meant to do, because we have to have that intuition in order to penetrate them. You know, we could talk about until the cows come home, but ultimately we need that spark from the divine to help us access the teaching is really getting at. And as you say, we do that by meditating upon the actual symbols. I think that's why they all emphasize them so much.
It's true. And I wanted to ask Mark if he has anything to add, because he's very quiet. You're there though, aren't you, Mark? Are you there?
I'm here. Yeah.
Anything you were really interested in this letter? What did you get from it?
Lost is a lot of what I got in this letter, which was interesting, because I think often my desire is to approach any sort of study from the point of logic and reason and empiricism, and this was clearly challenging me to move beyond that and integrate, you know, intelligence and wisdom, and learn to trust my intuition, which is something that yeah, is clearly a process that I'm engaging in learning to trust. So I think that probably the next time that I pick this up and read through this letter, maybe it will be more clear to me. But I feel like right now in this first read through, just sitting with just that really basic idea is where I need to remain, because there were certainly some things that jumped out at me, and then there was other times where I thought I'm looking at a page full of words that aren't coming together for me in any kind of way that I can make a whole lot of sense of. And I suppose that's okay. So I don't know that I have a whole lot to add to this conversation, but I've appreciated being in this space with you all and soaking up what it is that you have to offer, and look forward to reviewing this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. This is my second reading, and I consider myself still a newbie at this, Mark. And you're absolutely right. When you're ready, and when you've ripened a little bit more, and you feel ready to, when you read this text again, you'll reap so much more. It's a wonderful thing to look forward to. This second reading for me, I really got a lot from the imagery of the star, following the star, and the resonances of the star imagery through the luminous Trinity, the seal of Solomon, the stars in the image of above the sun, the 12 stars, my goodness. And then the star of Bethlehem, which is the guiding star. The guiding star, so which is the sun at midnight, moving into the cloud of unknowing, that the mystical path of trusting one's intuition. And that takes practice. It's so difficult. And he points out that even the wise men, the wise men who were trying to find the Messiah, who they did not trust the guiding star entirely. They had to stop and ask Herod, like, Herod, what do you know about this? But their discernment told them, they were wise enough to realize that Herod was very limited in his understanding and was at the level of just working with only pure brute power. And so they rejected that, and they realized they needed to actually deceive Herod. I believe they told Herod they were going one way when they were going another, because they realized that he was evil.
Mm-hmm.
He was just plain old evil. Okay, let's just call it what it is. And they realized that they had not trusted their discernment entirely and had to correct their path. They made a path correction to the manger, but they did make it to the manger. And that the image of the manger as being a central image of the birth of the Redeemer and the beginning of the process of resurrection, and that is the center of the mandala, which he points out that Jung is very good at pointing out these mandala images, and the center point would be the center point of the manger. The birth of Christ.
We're all in the same boat, aren't we, as well? It's not like people maybe read it and get it, and then we're all sat here, permanently inspired by the divine. I think it's more a case of it's a flash of insight which we have to hold on to. I mean, Nina Rudnikova talks about this. She says, okay, when you have this attainment of the Arcanum, when you feel at one with the divine, which probably anybody who's got faith has had a certain experience of communion with God at some point, that's what they're talking about. But we're still living on earth and still have to work through our karma, and we still have to get, we're not at the point of resurrection now, any of us. It doesn't matter how well we understand the words, we're still not all there. And I think that's quite important to remember, that this is supposed to represent the whole of the great work. So if you think you haven't done it, then you're probably on the right track, because none of us have done it.
And the key word you just said is to remember. And Tomberg points out the seasons of the year are always touch points for us to remember. So the point of Advent, the expectation of the birth of Jesus, it's this incredible experience to relive the experience of the manger every year. And every time we remember, we are building back the divine body, from pulling it back from the cosmos into these points of guiding light, that are manifested and incarnated here.
And we have Lent coming up, and I always think that's a really good time to build up to what is the resurrection, which is Easter. So actually, in a way, we have perfect timing ahead of us to start considering this. I know Lent and Easter are quite late this year, but that would probably be the time to try to gestate this sort of information. I think it's really important, actually, to go back to that if we can. I always try and mark Lent, because I do think that's where we can get some of the resurrection experience, if you like, when Easter comes along.
Dora, you were talking about marking Lent yourself, and you were talking about there was something you were going to focus on for Lent. Do you remember what you were talking about last week?
Really, what I typically like to do, this is what I feel like works best for me, is to add something and subtract something. And so the adding is the being very diligent and faithful with meditation, putting that in as the priority beginning of the day, no matter what time that means I have to get going. So that's my add. And then the subtract is something, like with the last years, maybe it's like 0 alcohol. I don't drink much anyway, but taking maybe 0 sugar, something that is, is pleasant, and it's kind of more almost like ritualistic, but being very purposeful about taking something away. The very end of this particular Arcanum was, and I think Mark just described it too, was he talked about moving from the meditation on the Arcanum to the use of the Arcanum, and then to hear Charlotte talk about, this spark. So that what that's saying to me is being open to that, and maybe preparing the way to be open to that. It's grace. It's a gift. It's not something I attain because I read this through and am diligent with it. I mean, yes, you need to prepare the soil for that, but there's another agent here. And I liked how he talked about, Jesus being sort of the agent, but Mary being the yes. Yes, so there's got to be this acceptance too. So that has played over. We talked about the luminous, it's the luminous yes. So it's connecting with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. That gives me some ideas also, because the subtraction idea of Lent, of giving up something, that is to help you to break up your usual patterns, to do that within your very body, because that resonate. If you can change a pattern in your body, it can then resonate upwards through your moral life, through your imagination, and help you to touch the divine, or open up, because you've broken a pattern apart. And that helps you to you're breaking open the shell. And the addition is interesting too, because to me, that would be the fire element of adding a fire under your practice, adding a fire of initiative, and using your will correctly to add initiative to your life. And then being open through the receptive aspect of the feminine by breaking up your patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're both right. And I think also, I hate to say it, but I do think fasting helps. And I find fasting very, very difficult. I get blood sugar issues and I can't stand it. But I do think I eat quite probably too much. And I do think it affects my meditation practice. And I completely agree with you, Dory, about doing the meditation every day. I used to do that religiously as part of I had a 7-year program with a teacher, and we were just, we just did it. We had 40 days on this, 40 days on that, and it works. That's just the fact. And then I completed my course, great. And then I just sort of slipped into not doing it as much. I still prayed and meditated, but not in the same structured way. But recently I spoke to Alice, and I think we both said, we need to just get onto this. I thought, okay, I'm going to meditate every day. And again, I found that was a positive step, and the dreams get more lucid.
Yeah.
I feel more positive. And it's just, you can't substitute practice, basically.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of willpower. And I certainly have struggled with this a lot. And it's ridiculous, because it's almost like the more you read, the more you know. It can become almost harder to do it, because the reading is almost like the doing. But I think it can hinder you in a way, because that's just adding to the intelligence aspect and knowing more. It's not actually giving you the wisdom which comes from the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I just don't think we can, any of us, dispense with it. And it can be different, if you're busy and you have to shoot off to work first thing in the morning, and it can be hard to make time for it. I mean, I sometimes, decide, okay, it's going to be 12 noon, because I know I'm not going to be up at 6, or even at night. It's just making sure you do have that time in a day to do your meditation. And I think that's when you will start to get the so-called results.
I would add that the greatest, my greatest times of development and opening up were during times when I had a very strong meditation practice that was religious, sacrosanct time. It was just no question. And I've put that aside, and everything has fallen to crap. But I would add that when I have held the office, I call it holding the office, in any intention, flexing my will to hold, to be there, to be present, to actually devote my time, and be actually loyal to that. And in my case, it was holding a Taizé service once a month, where we began to attract more and more people. But it's because we religiously held that space for people to come. I also did the same thing with my original Thomas group. When I met my Thomas group in the church, sometimes nobody showed up, and I would light the candles and do centering prayer alone anyway, because I was holding the space. Because for me, the point was, I'm holding the space open to be receptive. And it was up to the Holy Spirit to fill it. It wasn't my job to do anything but to have faith that the Holy Spirit would fill that space that I'm holding. If I am just loyal and dedicated to that purpose and do not flag in that loyalty, the rewards are great. And holding that space, holding the office, I call it. It's the same practice as done in a monastery of sitting and doing the chants and the psalms and holding the daily office at every 3 hours during the day and all night. Monks and nuns, they have to get up at 3 a.m. to hold the office. That's a flexing of the willpower. That's a practice of the willpower. Getting up at 3 a.m. to go and chant. But
as long as it doesn't become just pure routine, because that's the other danger. Oh, I'm saying it, I'm have to do this practice, therefore I'm kind of running through the motions. And that's really, that's maybe one thing I have to watch anyway, if I'm doing something with great regularity, that it doesn't just become rote. And I think that's possibly why I end up, I let that circle disperse for a while and then seize the next moment when it comes, just finding that. But some people, I guess, don't struggle with that, but I always have, because I find routine generally quite difficult.
Right. Well, that's why.
But if you talk about meditation as being rote, I mean, how does it really become rote? I mean, if you're sitting, you're pushing them, you're pushing the thoughts away. And I think I'm not Catholic, so I don't do the rosary, but I would think, I would think that would certainly become rote, but I would think that would also be valuable. I'm not sure if you're in it, is that not valuable then?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, sometimes I think, I'm really not up for meditating. I'm just not there. I'm in work. But then after a few seconds, you settle down and you get into the practice. Yes, you're right. I think maybe it's easier to happen if you have perhaps a set mantra, but yes, it will be very, I can't imagine actually doing the rosary and not getting into it on some level properly.
Yeah, I think the point is that you're imposing another pattern of practice in order to break up other patterns that are not useful.
That's the Rosicrucian path as well, actually, because I think it might be Steiner. Somebody writes how the typical human being is under the influence of the moon as a natural state, and it's by exercising our willpower in the manner in which we're speaking that you become under a solar influence. That's where the solar influence comes in. So it's by mastering our typical human lunar reflective quality, right, with something more disciplined.
Here's something that I heard from a long time ago from Cynthia Bourgeault, who said, did you know that the average human can only concentrate on one thing for about 90 seconds? And past that, and you try that experiment, try to hold a thought for more than 90 seconds, and you will find, yes, indeed, the mind slips away like a little eel. It just slips away. Try that. It's very interesting.
Something pops in. There's always another idea, even if it just flies by. You think, oh, whoa, what was that?
You think, oh, we have great powers of concentration. I can hold a thought for more than 90 seconds. Try it. It's very interesting. And of course, this is why the transcendentalists do the mantra. This is why the mantra and that sort of thing is introduced. And that's why I like centering prayer, because centering prayer is not an attention prayer. It's not an attention practice. It's an intention practice. So when I'm in centering prayer, when I'm trying to center, I use my sacred word or phrase or my sacred vision. It could be anything, the cross, anything. But you don't keep it in your consciousness all the time. Basically, what you do is you gently, oh so gently, bring your intention back to that focus word or image only when you found that you wandered. So you can let it go. Once you've done wandering and you've brought it back, you ever so gently let the word go again, and then let things flow. And you'll find that there's more and more spaciousness that comes, but not an attention. It's an intention of the heart. So it's I love the practice because it's an intention. And I love the way Thomas Keating calls it, which is the intention to rest in the heart of God. So it's simply centering prayer. I love it. It's very peaceful to me because it's a resting. I'm just bringing myself back to resting in the heart of God. It's almost like that interval between your dreams, really, where you're trying to widen that interval between dreams. Dreams are wonderful, but so is that very restful space of utter peace and silence in between the dreams. So,
and that's such a benefit for me is making the intention of doing this for Lent, because it takes away the anxiety of, am I going to meditate this morning, or am I going to do these other 10 things? It's gone. You don't have that, am I going to do this or not? It's gone. I'm going to do it. I promised I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So that works well. And then my dearest hope is that it will then continue on afterwards. That'll be the next question.
and it's kind of like the practice of substituting faith for worry, for instance. Am I going to worry about this, or am I going to have faith that giving this time and holding the office is going to be the better path right now? It's going to be the better path because it is practicing my faith. And every time you practice your faith, you get to smack down a worry, or as Mark puts it, smack the head of the snake, crush it, the head of the snake of the Ouroboros, the closed circle, right? Anyway, we need to stop. I'm going to stop the recording now. We can continue, but I want to stop the recording to keep it a manageable length of time. Okay, so let me do that. Stop.